Hello everyone, welcome to the BOOKphilic YouTube channel. Now in this video we are going to study the ambiguity of the grammar. Now in the previous video we have studied what do you mean by grammar, what are the four tuples, and we have taken one more example that is right over here. We have taken one example that is of rules of grammar. S derives capital S plus S and capital S minus S or small a or small b or small c. So we have taken these small rules of grammar and we have derived the syntax a minus b plus c with the two ways. That is nothing but the LMD and RMD. So in that video we have discussed that in two ways we can derive the same syntax a minus b plus c. Hence the parser will get confused. Which one should I use to generate the parse tree? So in that way, we are going to understand what do you mean by ambiguity. This property is known as ambiguity. Ambiguity is nothing but more chance of whenever there will be more chance of deriving the same syntax by using two ways, LMD or RMD, or LMD1 or RMD1. Okay, so in that way, this is nothing but the ambiguity. So let us understand this ambiguity. Okay, so first of all, we will be learning the ambiguity. Here we have written 3 points you have to understand regarding the ambiguity. So I have written the short notes over the ambiguity. Whenever you will understand the ambiguous property of the grammar, you will be getting a huge lines of definition in your books. But here you are getting only the important things that you want to learn, that you have to learn, that you have to answer in order to understand the ambiguity property of the parser. So let us understand with the first point is that a grammar is said to be ambiguous if and only if more than one LMD is formed. What do you mean by more than one LMD? That is, if we can derive the same syntax that a minus b plus c, a minus b plus c using LMD, we can derive if we can derive the same syntax using LMD in two different ways, then that property is known as ambiguity. Or you can say if we can derive more than one RMD, so it is also known as ambiguity. Or more than one parse tree can be generated from a given input string, that is also known as ambiguity. Hope you have understood, and this will be easier for you guys if you have watched the previous video in which I have discussed the total properties of ambiguous. So let us start with one example here. Here, right over here, we have taken one more example, that is E derives capital E plus E and capital E star E or ID. ID is nothing but a terminal and capital E is nothing but the non-terminal, and this capital E is nothing but the start symbol from where the parse tree will be started. Okay, now we are giving the input string. So in your college examination, the input string will be given and the one rules of grammar will be given, and it will be asked in your question paper that check whether the following grammar is ambiguous or not, and there will be a derive input that you have to derive it. Okay, so let us understand by solving this property. Okay, so here is the solution you are getting right now. So let us start with one example, that is LMD. So in LMD we have discussed in the previous video that by the name it is suggesting that LMD, that is left to right, and in RMD is nothing but from right to left. So we have to derive the non-terminals from right to left, and in these we have to derive the non-terminals from left to right. Hope you have understood. So let us move on to the next things that we are given. First of all, we have to check what we are given. We are given E plus E and E star E. So as we have discussed in the previous video that we have to take first of all this capital E plus E and then E star E. So in this way we will be deriving the ID plus ID star E. So we will be trying to derive the same syntax using two different ways called LMD or RMD. So if we can derive the same syntax using LMD and RMD, then then we can say that this is nothing but the ambiguous grammar. So let us start with that. Okay, so let us move on to the solution. So first of all, we are getting the capital E derives capital E plus E. So as by name it is suggesting that it will be derived from left to right. So leftmost non-terminal is nothing but this capital E, and this capital E will be replaced by a small id, and it is nothing but a terminal which cannot be derived further on. So hope you have understood. Okay, in the next, here it is the next stage. So in the next stage we are having the E derives id plus capital E. So in this case we are having the leftmost terminal non-terminals capital E, that is right over here. Hope you can understand it. Okay, so now we are deriving this capital E into E star E. So why are we going to do like this? So you might have some questions regarding this, why we are going to start with capital E derives star E star E. So let us make you understand. When we will take a capital E instead of ID, okay, when we will be using, so let us make you understand. So there are two rules of grammar. Either we can derive it into capital E derives ID, or we can derive it into capital E star capital E. So we want to derive the syntax ID plus ID star ID. Okay, this is the target. We have to derive this syntax id plus id star id. So when we will be trying to derive these things, this capital E as E derives id, then we will stop right over E derives id plus id. So we cannot derive id plus id star id. So in order to get this star, we have to derive this capital E first of all into E star E, and then only we can derive this capital E into respective ID. So hope you have understood. This is the logical things, you can understand it very well. And now let us start with capital E. So we are deriving capital E into capital E star capital E, and the right and the leftmost non-terminal is nothing but this capital E. This capital E, hope you it is visible to you. Let us change it to the another signal. So this is the capital E. Okay, now we are deriving this capital E into small id. What is left now? This is star E. So this is star E is the leftmost non-terminals which will be ultimately derived into id again. So ultimately we are having this capital E derives id plus id star id. So now we would try to derive the same syntax using another production rule of grammar, that is E derives E star E. So at the rightmost side this capital E is there, so we would be deriving this capital ID is there, and instead of this capital E, which is now the rightmost side of the non-terminals of the production rule, we will be deriving this capital E into capital E plus capital E. Now we are having this capital E plus capital E star ID. So the rightmost non-terminal is this capital E, which will be further on derived into ID, and at the rightmost side, which is nothing but this capital E, which will be ultimately derived into ID. So at last we are getting the same syntax. E derives ID plus ID star ID and ID plus ID star ID in two different ways. So this is nothing but the ambiguous. If you want to understand this ambiguous property, you would just have to learn the one terminal, one term, that is the ambiguous is nothing but the confusion. Suppose you are a parser. You are the parser of a compiler and you want to derive a syntax. You want to derive a syntax into the respective parse tree. So in order to generate the parse tree, you can derive in two different ways. So now you will get confused which path should I use in order to generate the same syntax by using the property of the rules of grammar. So which one should you follow? This is the main confusion that will occur in your mind. So this is nothing but the ambiguous property of the grammar. So hence we can say that this grammar is nothing but ambiguous. But wait, what we have understood in the third point of the grammar. So let us see it right over here. So we have written that more than one LMD is formed, more than one RMD can be formed, and more than one pass tree can be formed. So we have derived the LMD and RMD, but we cannot derive the one parse tree, more than one parse tree. So let us derive the more than one parse tree right over here. So at first we are doing nothing but, so let us take one example. Okay, let us take one example. We are getting the same parse tree. We are using the same rules of grammar that we have derived right over here using the LMD and RMD. But there is the big but. We want to derive using the same we want to derive the same syntax by using LMD first of all. This will be called LMD parse tree, and then RMD second of all. This will be called a RMD parse tree. So let us understand with one example. Okay, so we have to generate E derives E plus E. So we have written right over here E derives E plus E. So you can see that E is nothing but the star symbol, and it is also known as the root of the parse tree. So E derives capital E plus capital E, which is written right over here. Now let us make you understand in the next term, which is, so here we have deriving capital E into ID, and we are deriving this capital E into ID. Hope you have understood. And this plus is as it is, and this capital E is as it is. Now in the next step, we are deriving this capital E into E star E. Hope you can see it here. Okay, I am just changing the uh, things into this. So this E star E. So this capital E is derived into E star E, which is right over here. Which is right over here. You can see it right over here. E derives into E star E. E derives into E star E. Hope you have understood. And ultimately, we have derived this leftmost non-terminal into ID. So we have derived the capital E into ID and this capital E into ID. Okay. So hope you have understood. And in this case, okay, E derives E plus E star ID. And so let us take the star symbol as it is. Okay, the battery is no more. Okay, so as you can see right over here, now we want to derive the RMD parse tree. So we want to derive the RMD parse tree using the same rules of grammar that we have used. Okay, so first of all, this start symbol capital E is written right over here, and this capital E is being derived into capital E star E, which is written right over capital E star E. So you can understand it. Okay, now I am just minimizing this so that you can understand very well. Okay, so let us move on to the next thing, that next step, that is we are deriving this capital E into star capital E plus E. So we are deriving again capital E into E plus E, and this capital E is derived into a small id, which cannot be further derived on. Okay, now, ultimately, we are deriving this capital E into ID and this capital E into ID. So, in that way, we have written ID. So, in that way, we have gotten our respective LMD parse tree and RMD parse tree. So, now what we should write? What we should write right over here? We have written that as LMD and RMD has different parse tree. So you can see that we have gotten the same syntax, id plus id star id, and here also id plus id star id. So we are getting the same syntax by two different parse trees generated using the LMD and RMD properties. That's why the grammar is said to be ambiguous in nature. So hope you have understood. Now in the next video we will be understanding the further on. So till now, thank you very much for watching till now.